Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend the session today, which is on a topic which we believe is very pertinent and relevant as we speak. And it comes with a host of challenges which we, not just as a country, but as a planet, need to address. The significant and huge problem of plastic waste accumulation and hence plastic waste management as well. Now, by way of introduction, I am Suman Jagdev. I am a partner with Praxis and part of the industrial goods and services practice, which includes all the work that we do as part of circular economy as well. My co-panelist today is Rahul Nene, who heads sustainability at Huhtamaki India, which is a leader in flexible packaging. And in his current role, Rahul leads the strategy and implementation of ESG and sustainability actions across the organization, as well as managing ESG disclosures and initiatives at a corporate level. Thanks to Rahul for being with us here today. To set the context, we launched the report titled Innovation in Plastics, Potential and Possibilities earlier this year. And the report is actually driven by the belief that a sustainable and robust circular economy in plastics can be built in India, and to address the damage which is caused by plastic waste, and which is a significant problem to solve for at this time. And the report actually examines the plastic value chain, the waste management ecosystem in India to identify the challenges, and with a special emphasis on innovations. And it also kind of delves into the innovations, the regulatory framework, as well as learnings that India can potentially look at from across the globe. And in the session today, we will share some insights from the report, but more importantly, keep it as a conversation. So we get some insights even from industry perspective. So Rahul will be sharing some of his insights as part of Huhtamaki in terms of some of the initiatives that they have been undertaking as well in this space. We'll keep the presentation to about, say, 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for any questions and clarifications. Yeah, so just to set the context, as I said, so packaging applications, if I just look at the end-use sectors of plastic, packaging contributes to about 60% of that consumption. And out of that, flexible packaging is about 43% and the remaining is by rigid packaging. So packaging as a space is a large consumer of plastic. And if I look at the applications of packaging, looking at primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging. So primary packaging is anything which comes in direct contact with the product. And secondary is anything which is to do with any branding or logistics considerations. And tertiary is predominantly to enable transportation. So primary and secondary packaging together contribute about 80% of this consumption. So just to set the context in terms of plastic usage, and which are the end-use sectors which end up consuming most of this. If I kind of shift the lens a bit to saying which are the key polymers. So plastic, as you would understand, so given the paucity of time for this session, happy to, our report is already in circulation, but in terms of just setting the context a bit, and at the end of the day, from a plastic manufacturing process standpoint, plastic is typically manufactured from fossil fuels, and it's broken up through a process called cracking into monomers, which subsequently are kind of aggregated to form polymers, which serves as an input for plastic manufacturing. So just to set the context a bit, because we're getting into a bit of a technicality here. So if I look at the types of polymers which are prevalent for plastic manufacturing and production, so you have typically about 7 types of polymers. So which is PET is the polyethylene terephthalate. Then you have high density polyethylene, PVC polyvinyl chloride, and low density polyethylene. And then you have polypropylene, polystyrene, and some other categories as well. So most of them, as you see, we are familiar. We see them in our daily lives, but not maybe label them as specific polymers. But they come in use as for creating specific packaging material. For example, PET, as we know, is used to create the bottles which are used to store water, soft drink, the food jars, cooking oil, etc. Similarly, HDP, which is high density polyethylene and low density polyethylene, because of their stiff and hard wearing properties, are used for packaging or storing different products like, for as milk containers, bottles for FMCG products, food wrapping, etc. And in terms of just the waste generation, which is contributed to by each of these polymers, high density and low density polyethylene are the largest contributors, followed by PET and polypropylene. In terms of the end-use packaging applications, which we believe are the largest contributors of plastic waste, so typically just translating some of this to how this pans out in our daily lives. So consumer packaging, so a lot of the packaging which is used to, say for example, pack our toiletries like toothbrushes, toothpaste, a lot of the edible oil packaging, confectionaries, beverages. So all that is part of the entire consumer packaging cohort, right? Then you have commodity packaging, the packaging which is used for fertilizers, cement, chemicals, etc. Then you have the packaging which is used in pharma and hospital setups like diapers, bed pads. And then you have industrial packaging, all the rigid foams, the bubble wraps, the containers for oil storage, liquid oils, etc. So before kind of get into other forms of plastic and some of the innovations, so Rahul, from your standpoint, if you can share some of your perspectives. Now, this was to set the context in terms of the various uses of plastic, and packaging obviously is a key contributor to this consumption. And you being part of a large packaging company, flexible packaging company, and importantly leading some of the sustainability initiatives, any thoughts and perspectives on how you see the usage evolving? What are some of the considerations as we move forward?
Sure. Thanks, Suman. I think first of all, thank you for setting this context so beautifully. I mean, this kind of gives a good picture as to what actually, the database picture of what consumption of plastic and plastic packaging is in India with the applications. Now, coming to plastic, I think the first thing that I actually want to say is, today, more so from a perception point of view, plastics have suddenly become villains. Like everyone is saying that when it comes to sustainability or when it comes to doing the right things, people have this perception that if you get rid of plastics, then I think the packaging becomes sustainable. There are so many, I don't want to take names, but especially some of the new companies, they market sustainable packaging solutions just because they got rid of plastic. And I think that is not science based, because honestly, plastic as a material, I personally think it's quite beautiful. It has a lot of advantages. In fact, plastic as a material was invented to to have an environmental benefit, because the first plastic was invented to replace ivory, and ivory at that time was obtained by poaching elephants. So it was done for an environmental benefit. So, and even today, when used properly, I think plastic has wonderful benefits. It is lightweight, it is efficient, it reduces the transportation loads, it reduces logistics costs, it reduces emissions in logistics. There are multiple applications where plastics, I personally feel, based on science and data, would be the most sustainable choice when it comes to packaging. And the other aspect is packaging in itself, I would say. People sometimes forget this point, but packaging in itself is a sustainability driver. Like for example, we have this data that one third of the food that is made in the world goes waste. And if the packaging does not perform in terms of its functionality, then for example, for food applications, the food that it holds is going to go waste. And when something goes waste, all the environmental impacts that went to manufacturing that particular product also go waste. So protecting whatever it is holding is in itself, I would say, a sustainability initiative. Where I would say the problem is coming is the waste part, because the way we have designed this value chain of plastics, it's quite linear, and it's not going back into, like we said, and maybe we'll discuss later in depth on the circularity of it. And because that is not happening, and there's a lot of leakage of plastic post consumer use into the environment, and that's where I think the majority of the problem is. So I personally feel, I was reading somewhere that Reuters has come out with a research that in G20 countries, it's by 2050 the plastic consumption is going to in fact double. And I see as and how the population grows, the need for food transportation and other when products have to be safely transported, you need good packaging, and plastic performs a lot of functionality which other materials cannot. So I personally see the usage of plastic going up. And so I mean, in terms of usage patterns, it does not surprise me whatever you set up. The only other aspect I also would like to add is, while there are these 7-8 polymers, when it comes to especially flexible packaging, most of the packaging is multi-layered packaging. So there are multiple polymers that are brought together to achieve certain functionality, and many times they also have a foreign layer, as we call it, which is either a metallized layer or a paper layer, which is there to protect whatever it is holding. So especially if the product is a bit aggressive, say maybe hair color or toothpaste, then there will be some kind of a foreign layer which will be existing, or even our chips packets, it has a metallized layer. So this is an additional aspect where, which is currently existing, and we all know that MLP is one of the key factors that is right now posing a challenge when it comes to circularity. And that so how to so while I see the plastic consumption going up, how do we move away from MLP and move to more recyclable plastic based packaging solutions would be the key driver in the days to come, is what I feel.
Thanks, Rahul. Thanks for that. I think the insights are deep and obviously very pertinent and relevant to the challenge that we are kind of grappling with. Just kind of moving forward a bit now, coming to bioplastic. So bioplastic is a bit of a myth which needs to be demystified. So plastics, as we know, are typically manufactured from fossil fuels. Now bioplastics are bio-based plastics which are used or which are manufactured from agri feedstock and other organic sources. Now, and they can be either biodegradable or biocompostable. Now, biocompostable is obviously the ideal form of bioplastics which should be ideally be used and manufactured. And biocompostable plastic is anything which kind of undergoes degradation through natural biological processes, but it needs to have that compostable environment to be able to do that. And biodegradable, on the other hand, is something which degrades due to action from microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, etc. Now, biocompostable plastics are ideal, but they have their own challenges because it's expensive to manufacture biocompostable plastics. Recycling, it's not the easiest when it comes to biocompostable plastics. It has its own set of challenges. In terms of scaling the usage of biocompostable plastics, obviously there are opportunities that India has today, but there are certain key considerations. For example, there has to be a sufficient amount of agri waste or feedstock to be able to actually generate that kind of the amount of biocompostable plastics. Today, most of it is imported, which makes it expensive. Now, most of the manufacturing should ideally be done from monomers or base chemicals and not from competing with the food value chain. So I think that's the other important consideration. I think sorting and collection has its own set of challenges across plastics, irrespective of whether it's fossil fuel based or bioplastics. But that's something which needs to be kind of set in place when it comes to biocompostable plastics. And also, the degradability profiles are kind of unique to biocompostable plastics. So they need to be given, or they need to be given the right composting environment so that they compost, right? As the name process suggests. So this is I would say still the efficacy is still being tested. I think still a bit of a pilot, and there are I think tests going on in India, globally as well. I mean, while at scale, this can be a pretty accurate solution if we are able to produce bioplastics which offer the same functionalities as fossil fuel based plastics. But we believe that there is some distance to cover over there before we look at full scale replacement. Rahul, any thoughts on that? If it's something which you or your organization has tested out at your end in terms of pilots or some experiments?
Okay, to be honest, no. Like you actually rightly said, I think more data needs to be collected, more life cycle assessments need to be done, more uh, research needs to be done when it comes to biocompostable plastics. I know there are multiple organizations, especially startups, who are now working in this space, but at least for at our organization, and if you ask me personally as well, I think it's too early to comment, to be honest, on this. We should wait for more data, more research, and more life cycle analysis or assessments to be done, uh, because like on the right hand side, whatever you have mentioned as challenges currently, like for example, if you are sourcing it from, say, agro based or bio based sources, if you have to now today, if you have to replace plastic packaging by biocompostable plastic, uh, even in this, so if this sourcing, so will it have an environmental impact? Are we studying that? So I mean, my point is, uh, at a pilot stage it's a different case, but when we look at the kind of packaging that is required across the world, will this be really a viable solution? Is absolutely, there is no answer in my opinion at the moment. We as an organization also are not venturing at the moment into it, but I think this is something that everyone is keeping an eye out.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have more data and we'll have more answers in the coming years, I think.
Sure. And absolutely something which I think even as a scalable solution, something which has potential. And obviously, as the efficacy gets tested out a bit more with further experiments and scientific research, this is potentially something
Correct.
which can be a suitable replacement. Yeah. Now, in terms of just looking at packaging per se, and some of the initiatives which are being taken either by individual organizations or by industries at a larger scale, in terms of reducing the usage of virgin plastic when it comes to packaging, right? So there are some ideas which we kind of had identified through our work, through our conversations. And so there are some themes here. So like, for example, bioplastic we just talked about. So there are examples, numerous examples of companies who are trying out bioplastics to be used at scale. And so some FMCG companies like Marico, Nestle India, HUL, etc. They're looking at 100% biodegradable plastic usage. That's their target. There are certain global firms like Ecovative Design, for example, which is producing mycelium to be used for packaging, to actually produce packaging. When it comes to reusable packaging, for example, there are lots of examples. I'll also let Rahul throw more light on this. So, for example, you have PepsiCo talking about non-returnable glass bottles, for example, right? So there are examples of that nature. There is recycled plastic being used by FMCG companies in their packaging. So they have specific targets to move to 100% recyclable plastic packaging by 2025 for their products, for example. Even a lot of the chemical companies are speaking about that. And there is obviously the redesign of packaging, right? So redesign the packaging itself to cut down the amount of plastic which is required. So there are themes around
all of these factors. So we have now, so beyond EPR targets, we also have certain targets that are coming up in using of recycled content, and then reusing of packaging solutions. So absolutely bang on target when it comes to the different levers that various organizations are using. Now, like I said, not much into bioplastics right now, so I won't comment much on that. We are not working so much with it. But the other aspects, so first of all, when it comes to having a circular economy around plastics, obviously, how do I say? I'll first speak about the recycled plastic. Okay, so first, I think first and foremost, we need to kind of establish the right definition when it comes to recycling. Many a times, I feel that people misuse the word recycling, because recycling actually means that you process a waste, and then whatever is the outcome, you use it for the same application that it was used previously. If you are, for example, recycling a packaging waste, a piece of packaging waste, then the recyclates that you get should be used to manufacture plastic packaging itself. Then to me, it's recycling and it's circular. Many times today that what we are referring to recycling is actually downcycling, where you recycle something, and especially MLP, it kind of downgrades in quality, and then it is used to make, say, a dustbin or furniture panel, and then further it would degrade, and ultimately it will go to an end of life solution. So first we need to be clear on what we are talking of when it comes to recycling. Point number one. Point number two, especially the current flexible packaging, I would say, solutions that we have, which is the majority of the issue when it comes to plastic waste, is like earlier said, multi-layered packaging, which is MLP. And because the packaging is made of various layers of various polymers which have different melting points, recycling it becomes an issue. Because in India, we majorly have mechanical recycling, we don't have chemical recycling. So we cannot maintain multiple melting points in extrusion. And then what happens is, especially if it has a foreign layer, then there will be carbon content into it, there is metallized content into it, there will be different polymers mixed together. The output recycled content is something that is of not great quality, which so it cannot be used back into packaging manufacturing. So I think that's where also you have mentioned that most of the companies are our customers, and in fact our ambition is to make our packaging solutions 100% recyclable. So when we say recyclable, what we are trying to do is we are trying to maintain the functionality of a multi-layered packaging solution through a single polymer. So when you have a single polymer doing the work of a multi-layered packaging, when it is thrown away by the consumer, it can be easily recycled. You don't have this problem in terms of having different types of polymers. And so we have a program called as Blue Loop, which is absolutely targeted towards this, that by year 2030 we need to have 100% of our solutions which are compliant on this particular parameter. So when this is enabled, you will see more circularity, more recycling content that is possible. And then there is obviously the other aspect of regulations stopping it for use of food applications at the moment. But I think as and how research progresses, it will improve. The other aspect is definitely in terms of so when we see a redesign of packaging, it also is this redesigning that I spoke of, where we move away from multi-layered polymers and we move to a monopolymer material for the same functionality. And the second, I think, redesign opportunity that I personally see is standardization of packaging for at least certain applications, which many times people don't speak about. But if for certain applications we can standardize the structures, right? And then, like for example, today milk pouches generally have all milk pouches in India have a standard structure. So everyone knows, even the uneducated waste collector knows where to go and give them milk pouch, and we have a set process to collect and recycle it back. So so this kind of standardization, if can also be implemented in terms of the redesign thinking of packaging, I think that's another opportunity that I would want to say. Reusable packaging again needs to be clarified more, I feel. So when we say reuse, but reuse for what purpose, right? Like for example, today if I buy a PET water bottle, I can definitely reuse for planting plants in my house. So it is reusable, so to say. Yeah. So again, it's a very great term in my opinion when it comes to reusability. We need to actually monitor what we are talking of when it comes to reuse applications. There are also aspects when it comes to quality. Like for example, if you are making reusable packaging, most of the packaging has some kind of traceability number printed on it or etc. to avoid counterfeiting. Now, if you make something reusable, how will we ensure that there is no counterfeiting, for example? So these aspects also need to be thought about when we try and implement reusable packaging, and are some of the challenges I would say that would come up in the days to come, and which industry does not have a solution per se. But like I said, the regulations are pushing in this direction. I think reusing, reduction at source, very cliched, but very factual, which is the 3 R's that we see and say. I think in that the regulations and the thought process of the industry is going towards that direction. And I would say, while it's a challenge, also it's a great opportunity, like you have rightly mentioned in the slide as well. A lot of possibility of innovation in multiple ways, either it's for recycling, for redesigning, for reusability, or in the future if it comes to bioplastics also. So overall, I would say an exciting time to be in the field.
Correct. Absolutely. And I think what we are also seeing is a lot of, fresh ab initio scientific research being undertaken by FMCG companies. So the likes of Unilever, P&G, Nestle, PepsiCo, we have talked about. So all these companies are actually undertaking pretty deep research, specifically from a packaging standpoint, and that is some of that is happening in India, some of that is happening globally, and they are making conscious efforts to transfer and cross-pollinate a lot of those learnings across their operations globally. So, which is obviously good news. I think India can also benefit from some of these research efforts, global research efforts from some of these companies.
Absolutely, and that's the right way to go, because everything needs to be science based rather than
Correct.
or just perception based. So absolutely the right thing to do.
Sure. I think we've talked about some of this. We've talked about while we talked about more the India context, we see a lot of global companies also actually moving in the direction and enabling the entire circularity by addressing either recycling or reuse, or looking at bioplastics, alternate use of alternate source of manufacturing plastics, which is beyond fossil fuels. So a company called Ecovative Design, which we talked about, is focusing on mycelium-based packaging. Plastic Energy is actually setting up recycling plants, which is more a material to fuel. So actually converting plastic waste into waste to energy or waste chemicals. And BASF, for example, everyone knows BASF. So is looking at coming up with different products. For example, mulch films to be used in agricultural applications as well. So there are initiatives being undertaken by a lot of MNCs globally, and hopefully some of that will start transferring to India as well, and will benefit the ecosystem here. Now, just looking at recyclability, we did touch upon this. So I think in terms of just polymers, PET and HD are the two most easily recyclable polymers. The others vary in terms of to what extent they can be recycled. Or maybe not be recycled at all, right? So, but these two are typically the most prevalent when it comes to being recycled, both in India as well as globally. And we see a lot of the other polymers which are not easy to recycle, and that's where slowly there are technologies which are coming up to address that. And some of the shift that we are seeing from mechanical recycling to chemical recycling is also due to address some of these issues when it comes to certain polymers not being easy to recycle. And there's certain functional attributes with some of the polymers which makes them difficult to recycle, because a high volume to weight ratio typically would mean that collection is difficult, and hence the recycling downstream it also becomes a lot more difficult and unwieldy. But this is where we are from a polymer standpoint, and the recyclability of the polymers. When it comes to just enabling the circular economy for plastics, which talked about some of that earlier, I think there are a host of, I would say, challenges which typically one needs to address before, while we are trying to create a circular economy. I think one is the starting point, obviously, is the entire collection and segregation of waste, which we all understand. I think it's generated at different points. Just aggregating all of that, collecting them in a structured manner through a defined process, through a defined mechanism, is a significant challenge, especially for a country like India, because of the sheer population, the geographic vastness, all of that come together. The logistics, so once it's collected, the logistics with transferring or transporting that is also a challenge. It's most of that is inefficient, unscientific. The garbage loading, the garbage collection itself is quite inefficient and unscientific today. So that's a significant challenge. Second would be the recycling. So obviously there's a lot of, in the first case, a lot of involvement, significant involvement of the informal sector, which we all understand, which is typically done by the rag pickers who actually handle the waste, collect, they help segregate. So that's a challenge. Chemical recycling is effective, but comes with a significantly higher initial investment, and that's why we see a lot of the recycling being done by mechanical recycling. There are health and safety hazards because these are purely occupational hazards. People who are actually involved in this industry, involved in recycling, the release of dioxins, etc., is a challenge. The enforcement of rules and regulations, obviously with EPR, we have EPR, but there are challenges around implementation. How do we make sure that the regulations are implemented to the T, and companies actually adhere to those? Investment again has been a challenge, just in terms of capital flow to enable investment in this space. Not enough, funding to spur and support R&D initiatives. Economics hence has been a bit of a challenge. Raw material fluctuations are there. The lack of market-based instruments. The quality of recycled plastic. So one is about getting the plastic recycled, but once it's recycled, the quality of the recycled plastic itself is questionable at times, because mechanical recycling, once it goes through a few rounds of recycling, the quality kind of degrades and deteriorates and is not amenable for subsequent use. So that's a significant challenge. And then we talk about the entire data tracking and monitoring, which is the limited and poor quality data across the value chain, and how does this just somebody get all that together to take informed fact-based database decisions. So I think these are some of the challenges which we have seen as far as enabling a circular economy is concerned. And I think there are, I would say, startups, I would say young organizations, relatively young platforms who are trying to address these issues across the value chain, right from waste collection to replacement. It could be a marketplace model. There could be equipment manufacturers, just enabling recycling. So interesting that we have seen a lot of young companies coming up here, coming up with interesting innovative solutions to address these problems at scale, because that's what typically a country like India requires because of the scale of the problem. And we understand that there are challenges as the startups scale up across various dimensions of the business model, but that's a problem to solve for, and that's where the collaboration across stakeholders, from the government to investors to the private sector to consumers themselves, will come a long way to actually make sure that they are successful. And I'll let Rahul also just talk about some of the work that they have been doing from with Huhtamaki, with some of the startups and some of the pilots that they have also been kind of running, and what kind of outcomes are coming through, and what is the view there. Yeah, over to you, Rahul.
Yeah, sure. So, Suman, like you rightly said, right? 2-3 slides that you presented right now. So when it comes to circularity and recycling, like for example, if you just go today and look at a garbage dump or a landfill today, you will hardly see the PET water bottles that are there. That the PET water bottles, you won't see them in the garbage dump. Why? Because they are monomaterial. They get good value. So like the economics, most of the challenges that we spoke about when it comes to recycling are not there when it comes to a material like PET, because the value is there, the economy is there. It's a profitable business case, easily recognizable. So waste collection and segregation is not an issue. So this is the model where PET has been successful. I think we need to kind of try and implement across different polymers. And while all the challenges that you mentioned are absolutely relevant and pertinent, there's additional challenge which I already spoke of, is the structure of the packaging in itself. So I think we need to start with that in terms of enabling recycling, that the structures of the packaging in itself should be recyclable, so to say. So we need to move to monomaterials. And then when we do that, all the other aspects, especially in terms of engaging all the stakeholders, so right from when a person, or I am also a consumer, so when I throw my waste in my home, am I segregating it, am I cleaning it, the other key challenge is the logistics from the consumer to the recycling infrastructure are not profitable at the moment. Then the most of the packaging is spoiled, so there's a lot of water requirement that goes into washing it before we can recycle it. And then all the applications that you said. So these challenges absolutely pertinent, and like you rightly said, many startups are now coming up who are able to address or are trying to address some of the challenges that are there in this value chain. I wouldn't like to take names, but absolutely we are working with at least 5 to 6 of the startups that you are right now presenting, and across value chains. In fact, not just in our regular profit operations, but we also have something called as a Huhtamaki Foundation, where we have set up a small pilot MLP recycling plant, and we are trying to see how best can MLP also be recycled. And then we are, for that aspect also, we are working with a couple of startups. So I think it's very important that people put up new ideas, new innovations, new investments into these various value chains, which are various parts of the value chain, where currently there is how to say, there is an issue, or there is some kind of a roadblock. And additional to startups, I mean, I also feel that we have this thing called CSR funding, and many times CSR funds are put up in various applications. If this is my personal thought, if you can jot down these key challenges where certain aspects of the value chain right now are not profitable, until the time research makes them profitable, if the CSR funding can go to these particular pockets, that also will kind of aid. And so, like you rightly said, which is also what we call as the UN SDG 17, the overall collective partnership of people needs to be brought about to successfully have circularity. And maybe the startups, maybe manufacturers like us who can make the structures, maybe the brands who are actually going to sell the products in the packaging, the consumer who is going to segregate it, the logistics companies, the recycling infrastructure, everyone needs to play their part in this.
Right. Absolutely. There was one question from Manas, I think, to understand the future of chemical recycling in India. I mean, I'll give my quick thoughts after that, Rahul, if you can just probably, complement that. So I think, and obviously chemical recycling is expensive and predominantly due to energy requirements. And I think if a cost of energy can be brought down specifically for chemical recycling units, this can potentially scale. And from what we understand, renewable source of energy could be an option. And as India pushes forward on the renewable energy agenda as well, and finds more applications, this could also be an area where it can be deployed at scale, and hence cost in initial investments, and then operating costs can also potentially come down. Rahul, any thoughts from you? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, compared to say 5 years before, I definitely see an uptake or an increase in the companies that are showing interest to put in investment into chemical recycling. So I know a couple of agencies who earlier did not have that thought process, but now are thinking seriously. So I see that positivity in terms of implementing it, but I also see a more focus, honestly speaking, towards changing the structures and making it recyclable in the existing infrastructure, which is mechanical, than changing the recycling infrastructure in itself. So I see more focus from the brands, from us producers, and overall anyone who is working in this field to kind of address that. But at the same time, we also have a lot of legacy waste that is existing already, and to cater to that, probably we will need certain investments into chemical recycling as well.
Sure. Just kind of moving forward. So as we have seen, we have looked at the plastic, waste management space, and so there are opportunities which are there and which are being addressed by young startups, through their interventions across the value chain, from sorting. So we see a lot of AI-based sorting, etc., being deployed today, and there are companies who are doing that. Then material to material innovation. There are companies who are investing and building innovative solutions around these. Just in terms of making the collection and sorting logistics a lot more optimized and efficient. So there is route planning and optimization software being developed by companies. Biocompostable plastic we've talked about. And there's just a lot of focus in terms of just getting more technology into the space. So people are able to make more informed decisions, because given the inherent inefficiencies in the system, a bit like agriculture, the opportunities are significant. The huge opportunities in terms of just getting in more efficiencies and making the value chain a lot more productive in this space. We've talked about, I think, the landscape a bit. I think just in terms of the regulations, the single ban on single-use plastics came into force last year. I think very clearly certain products have been brought into the ambit of single-use plastics, and there are opportunities when it comes to just replacing them with more environment-friendly solutions, and which is already kind of happening. But obviously the downside is that as the shift kind of happens, the product prices will be increased because cost of production will increase. So if it's about replacing a lot of these plastic straws with paper straws, etc., etc. There's some ballpark, increase in cost per pack which will happen, which is kind of natural. But I mean, that's the trajectory that as a country we want to take as we move towards a more sustainable economy, and also creating the necessary infrastructure around plastics. I think there are existing alternatives which are already there in terms of replacing some of these plastic products which fall under the ambit of the single-use definition. And there are a lot of innovations which are already happening in this case, right? So just companies focusing on bringing in substitutes to replace this, because there is an opportunity here, and regulation subsequently as we move forward will also play a role in kind of shifting the needle as far as innovation is concerned in this space. I think one of the recent regulations, probably Rahul, you can also enumerate a bit more on this, is the entire regulation which the FSSAI brought in around food contact applications which can potentially be packaged with recycled plastic, subject to certain guidelines. Now, which was a no-go area, no-go space earlier, but as per a recent amendment, this has been allowed with certain conditions, which we believe is a positive for the sector and can lead to more widespread applications across the board. Rahul, any thoughts on this? Because
I think you're right. Well. I think it was in June of last year where FSSAI came out with a draft regulation where they are basically focusing on recycled PET. So no other polymer at the moment, but at least enabling recycled PET for food applications. And like you said, it's a positive step because to enable circularity in food packaging, this is a must-have, and we need to undertake research to kind of how best can we enable recycled content into food packaging solutions without impacting the food quality. So a positive step, and I think a lot of focus and research would go in this direction in the next 2 years is what I feel overall.
Right. Just looking at from a regulation standpoint, what different countries have been doing. I think there are obviously learnings which India can take from these examples. So obviously it's not a transfer. It's not a direct transfer of these regulations to an India context, because they need to be customized or nuanced to address the local, the local environment and conditions in India. But at the end of the day, there are certain learnings which India can probably refer to. So, for example, we just looked at some European countries. For example, the entire concept of having specific targets for recycled content in plastic packaging, and there are penalties imposed if companies don't comply with those. There is landfill tax which is imposed in the UK. Right, so for garbage which is kind of dumped in landfills on waste producers, so the waste producers are actually taxed with this. There is waste collection charges in Belgium, which is called as a pay as you throw system. Essentially, when municipalities need to kind of collect the waste and do the segregation and sorting at their end, because people who are the waste creators don't really sort and sort the waste. For example, very simplistically, to dry waste and wet waste. So then the municipality or the local authority actually charges a fee, right, to consumers like us for not complying with the sorting requirements. Then there's a deposit refund system which Finland uses, for example, where customers are actually charged a certain price which is included within the purchase price of a lot of PET bottles, for example. And when they return the bottle, the money is refunded, right? So they're just driving behaviors at a certain level to make sure that the waste is getting collected in a more centralized fashion and not getting dispersed, because that's when collection and sorting becomes a bigger challenge, right? So some examples and some experiences from other countries which potentially India can look at as well moving forward. I think the other recent concept has been the concept of plastic credits, very similar to how carbon credits work, and essentially driven by the EPR regulations again. So when a purchasing company, the company which is actually generating waste and putting it out there, has the responsibility of collecting it all back and getting it recycled. So the purchasing company actually then has to credit funds to the project developer, who in this case is the company responsible to get the recycling done, and through a separate recycling project. And then the project developer is issued credits by a certification process, which is then issued to the purchasing company. So very similar to a carbon credit system. It's still quite nascent in India. The mechanism has to still be given a lot more structure and a framework for companies to be able to avail of these, and then also report through a more centralized, aggregated manner. But we believe it's a step in the right direction, and again can go a long way in terms of just driving behaviors across the value chain, and also as companies look at their own net zero kind of ambitions, the targets, and how they can enable that, right? And also be given the right credits and be recognized for the investments being made to be compliant with the regulations. Just I think bit of a concluding slide to say that at the end of the day, when we look at the value chain, there are different stakeholders. So we have the government, we have the industry, we have consumers, and so how do we see all of these entities kind of coming together to make sure that India as a country is able to meet its circular economy objectives as far as plastic is concerned. So, I mean, just in looking in terms of, collection, for example, we see the entire EPR on low recyclability packaging waste. It's something which the government can potentially push, especially as Rahul earlier mentioned on MLP and food contact plastic waste. Have mandates to increase post-consumer recycled content in packaging. Again, something which can be pushed through regulation. The industry can actually come together, integrate with the value chain, work with the informal sector a lot better to ensure collection and segregation happens a lot more efficiently. And the consumers need to kind of follow the segregation guidelines. I mean, this is something which is again completely dependent on individuals. I mean, we have seen some of that happening in micro situations or in micro markets, starting with the our building complexes as societies where we live in, just complying and with the requirement to segregate wet waste and dry waste. So some of those actions will have long-term effects. Sorting, a lot of technology can be brought in, and some players are already doing it. It can be done at scale. So just by using a lot more AI-driven sorting, etc. And consumers can typically also do that. Recycling, again, the government can potentially mandate blending of PCR to non-food applications as well. So we've seen a regulation which is moving in that direction, which we just talked about, one of the recent amendments. And industry can actually help scale up the recycling infrastructure by setting up more plants, the entire redesign, reuse theme that will also provide a fillip to this entire to the effort. Upcycling is something which we talked about earlier. I mean, there are opportunities. There are companies like AppChemy, etc., who are doing this entire conversion of material to fuel through pyrolysis. So essentially converting the plastic waste into either liquid or gaseous fuels. So there's an opportunity there as well. So potentially we can scale that up. And then we talked about biocompostable substitutes as well. It has its own challenges a bit, juries a bit out there, but I think that's something which that can be potentially pushed as a longer term solution. And if it's made more cost effective, can potentially be a solution that can offer a lot more options to plastic users from a recycling, from a reduction in usage perspective, from both aspects. And I think the industry here can also play an important role in terms of just identifying the waste streams, aggregating the waste stream, for example, agri-based feedstock, agri-based waste, and then just manufacture bioplastic from there. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of these timelines are, some are medium term, some are immediate, need to be done kind of right away. But I think from a trajectory standpoint, we have started taking the right steps as a country. And the report that we launched earlier this year, the objective was to actually galvanize action across these stakeholder groups to make sure that they are working in a concerted, collaborative manner to solve this problem, and not just at a state or a regional level, but more at a scale, at a pan-India level. Yeah, so I think those were kind of the thoughts that we had from a stakeholder participation standpoint. Rahul, any thoughts here in terms of how you have been working with the larger ecosystem to make some of this happen?
Yeah, no, not much more to add than what I was talking before. But as producers, like first, as we said, to enable plastic to be a sustainable material for packaging, we need to have circularity around it. And for enabling that circularity, every stakeholder needs to play their part, from consumers to producers to brands to recycling infrastructure to regulatory authorities, policymakers, everyone. And we as producers, I would say, we from our end, our focus is to have sustainable packaging solutions in the market, which can aid this recyclability to ensure the structures that are that can be recycled in the infrastructure that is available in the country. So that's the biggest focus that we have. But along with that, like I said, we also are conducting our own research, like you said, on multiple areas that we spoke of. Maybe could be bioplastics, it could be in terms of if there are any alternates. So a lot of focus is also going in terms of if there is an alternate, what could it be, or if really at least having the scientific data around what is actually the most sustainable solution for a particular solution. That's the thought process that we are having, and as a result that comes out of these research, the focus on the research that we put in, that is how we drive our programs. And last but not least, like I said earlier, we are also working with some of the startups that you spoke of, who are working in some other not manufacturing of packaging, but some of the other aspects of the value chain of plastic packaging, and doing our bit to kind of work with them to touch base with the other partners in the value chain. Last but not the least, I think industry associations, of which we are also a part, also play a critical role, because it's one company cannot do or bring about a major change. The entire industry needs to kind of change its focus and take it in the right direction. And when there is collective action, I think that brings in the real value and the real strength of being together to kind of address this challenge. So these are some of the parameters where we are actually kind of working as an organization. And I think throughout the entire presentation, I think you've quite beautifully captured the entire scenario when it comes to this market and this situation. So nothing beyond that, unless there's a particular